Hey, how's it going? My name is Andy Monroe, the co-founder of Bullish Events. Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be walking you through 4 simple metrics that you can track to optimize and scale your virtual events. And just to let you in on a little secret, this also works for in-person events, but more people are searching for virtual events on YouTube, so that's why I went with that name for this video. All right, with all that being said, we have had thousands of attendees come through both our virtual and in-person events, and we have identified 4 metrics that anybody hosting events should be tracking. The first metric that I want to talk about is your cost per registration. So your cost per registration is a very important metric that you should be tracking if you are hosting virtual or in-person events, and essentially is how much money you need to spend in order for somebody to register and sign up for your event. Now, I wish I could give you some industry average numbers for you to go after for your events, but the cost per registration is just highly subjective and depends on a lot of different variables. A few of these variables are if it's a virtual event, in-person event, free, paid, 1 day, 3 day, 5 day, your niche, your industry, the type of attendee you want to show up. There are so many different variables that it's hard for me to give you a target cost per registration for your events. The best way for you to find the cost per registration that works best for your business and for your events is just to start hosting events and collecting this data. You can pull different levers and test different hooks and messaging and event styles. You will start to see on average how much you are spending to acquire a registrant or a ticket purchaser, and something that I'll talk about a little later in this video, but you will also start to see out of all the people that register for your event, how many of those people actually end up buying. And by connecting those 2 metrics, you can kind of figure out what cost per registration you are comfortable with. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you as to what your cost per registration should be, but it's definitely a metric that you should be tracking if you are hosting virtual or in-person events. All right, metric number 2 is your show up rate. Your show up rate is just as important as your cost per registration. So what your show up rate is out of everybody that registered for your event, signed up, RSVP'd, bought a ticket, how many people actually showed up to your event. And this is a big misconception in the events industry, especially in the events for coaching and consulting companies, is people get into the events industry, they start hosting, events, maybe it's a webinar, a challenge, a workshop, or an in-person sales conference, whatever the event is, they assume that everybody who RSVPs and signs up for an event is just automatically going to attend, and that is not the case. You actually have to keep marketing to the people that sign up to your event to keep their interest there, to keep them captivated, to open some loops, to draw some curiosity, to create some desire, to get them to actually show up to your event. Now, luckily for you, I actually do have some industry average numbers to show you to kind of give you a ballpark to aim for your events. Of course, this is not binary. This does not apply to every single industry and every single event. The reason that you are tracking these metrics in this video is so that you can draw these conclusions on your own and run different tests and pull different levers to try and optimize these metrics as much as possible. That being said, I will show you some of the show up rates that we have seen for different events. Starting with virtual events, we'll run you through some virtual event show up rates. Up first for free virtual events, so I'm going to write free. We have seen typically a 20 to 30% show up rate for free virtual events. I know that seems kind of low, but you just kind of have to understand that that is what happens when you host a free virtual event. Of course, if you do a good job marketing your event and marketing to your registrants, you can increase your show up rate. But if somebody has no skin in the game, they didn't spend any money, there really isn't any consequences for them not to attend your event. But that's okay. You can still serve and solve problems for the people that do show up, and you can still see some pretty healthy conversions from free virtual events. But if you are hosting a free virtual event, you just need to account for really low show up rates. All right, now moving on to paid virtual events, we usually see anywhere from a 50 to 70% show up rate when it comes to paid virtual events. And the reason there is a different show up rate for paid virtual events instead of free virtual events, it's kind of intuitive, but when somebody spends money on something, they're more likely to show up. Additionally, the attendees for a paid virtual event are going to be much more high quality than those that are attending a free virtual event. So maybe you have a lower volume, but you might have a higher quality. So it's just important to understand that when you're deciding if you're going to host a free or paid virtual event. All right, now moving on to in-person events. I'm only going to do a paid in-person event metric because I've really only ever hosted paid in-person events. If you're hosting free in-person events, I would assume your show up rate would be 50 to 70%, maybe similar to a paid virtual event. I have no idea. That's based on nothing. So maybe if you've hosted a free in-person event, drop in the comments what your show up rates were. I'd be very curious to hear. But for our in-person events, we always charge tickets, and we typically see about an 80 to an 85% show up rate for paid in-person events. And it might bleed up there up into the 90% range, but there is still going to be some drop off for a paid in-person event. And that's just something that happens with events. Every single person that buys a ticket to your event is not going to attend. They might forget about it. Something might pop up. They might have a scheduling conflict. They might have a family emergency. Whatever it is, no matter what type of event you are hosting, whether it's in-person, virtual, free, or paid, you should account for some kind of drop off. And these are the show up rates that we have seen across the industry for virtual and in-person events. All right, after your show up rate, you want to be tracking your churn. And some people call this a few different things. It could be churn, it could be your bounce rate, it could be your drop off. Whatever it is, you are essentially just tracking out of the people that show up to the event, how many of them stay until the end and how many of them don't stay until the end. And if you want to get super into the weeds, you can actually track when people start to drop off at your events so that you can see if a certain topic is boring or if a certain session is resonating with the audience. Whatever it is, if you analyze your event and see how many people drop off and see exactly where most people drop off, you can start to tweak your event and make sure it's more engaging for your future events to come. And just to give you kind of a broad churn rate to go after for your events, of course, this is highly subjective on your event type, if it's free, if it's paid, if it's in-person, if it's virtual. I would try to have 70 to 85% of your attendees stay until the end of the event. If you can have 70 to 85% of people show up to your event and stay until the end, that means you are hosting a solid event. It's captivating, it's engaging, and you have the right attendees in the room. Of course, if you're hosting a free virtual event, that could be a little lower than 70%. If you have a paid in-person event, it could be a little bit higher than 85. That being said, if you have around 70 to 85%, you're good to go. All right, the last metric that we are going to be talking about is your conversions. And we're actually going to track 3 different metrics when it comes to your conversions because each one of them tells a little bit of a different story. So the first conversion metric that you want to track is your registrants. So out of everybody that bought a ticket, RSVP'd, or registered for your event, how many ended up buying? Then after that, you also want to analyze out of all of your attendees that actually showed up to your event, how many of them ended up buying? And finally, the last one you want to analyze is out of all of the attendees that stuck and stayed until the end, how many ended up buying? I know some of you might be thinking that this is a bit of an overkill, but this is actually really fascinating data, and you can see certain bottlenecks and drop-off points in your entire event funnel. For example, if you have a high drop-off rate and a lot of people don't stay until the end of your event, but at the end of your event you close 75% of the people that did stay, that may show that you don't have an offer or a pitch problem, but you have a content and experience design problem. All right, that's all I got for you in this video. Those were the 4 metrics that you should be tracking if you are hosting virtual or in-person events to optimize and scale your events. The first was your cost per registration. The second was your show up rate. The third was your churn or your drop off. And the fourth was your conversions. If you are a coach, consultant, or community owner that is currently hosting events but not seeing the results that you want, or you want to start hosting events but just don't know where to start, make sure you click the link down below in the description. Also, if you could like this video and subscribe to our channel, that would be super helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.